President Trump has been introducing some rather startling innovations for a supposed conservative president. And yet, even as he does so, the arrogant and rude culture of his entire team is starting to blow them up, particularly in relation to China. So let's unravel this. First, the innovations. You'll recall that conservatives generally are known for certain trademark beliefs. Specifically, they believe in leaving the market alone, keeping the government out of people's business, reducing the size of the state so that people keep more of their own money. I mean, that is still what's meant by a conservative, right? Whereas socialists, to be pronounced with a sneer by all good conservatives, are the ones who believe in big government, and particularly in government owning the means of production. Well, those people, they are crazy and bad, and hence to be catastrophized about at every election. And we know this because Republicans make adverts about shooting socialism with their big guns.
I'm Marjorie Green, and I approve this ad.
And yet, in recent weeks, President Trump, who increasingly seems to see it as the privilege of government to interfere in every institution in society, he has been pushing into private businesses, particularly in the tech sector. So, for instance, he struck what was correctly called an unprecedented deal with the chip giants Nvidia and AMD, so that they could sell a version of their powerful AI chips to China. These were Nvidia's H20 chip and AMD's MI308 chip. These chips previously couldn't be sold to China because they're powerful accelerators for AI development, and for China to have them was considered a national security risk. AI is, of course, one of the great areas of competition between the US and its emerging superpower rival, seen as crucial for the future, not just because of the commercial application of AI and its role in driving economic dominance, but also, of course, because of its military applications. Keeping the edge there could literally be life or death. Now, actually, the H20 chip had been developed specifically to be sold to China to get around restrictions that had been introduced by the Biden administration. Then Trump had them banned back in April because national security, winning the race, all that stuff. And yet now the companies were being told that they could sell them after all. The catch? Well, both companies had to agree to pay the Trump administration 15% of the revenues from the sales of those chips to China. Investor and economist Peter Schiff described it as a federal shakedown of private companies, saying it was unconstitutional, as are export taxes. So basically, the government was relaxing national security export controls in return for a share of the proceeds, making itself a partner in a joint venture, if you will, which is somewhat startling. I mean, what would Marjorie have to say about it? Either Trump was wrong to ban them, in which case doing so and then reversing it in exchange for a fee, well, seems at first glance to look like corruption, or else the bans were justified, in which case then casting them to one side for a fee, at first glance looks like corruption. Now we'll come back to those chips because they're at the heart of the story. But in addition to those joint ventures, Trump went even further with the company Intel, another chip maker. First, Trump, from entirely out of the blue as far as I could see, called for the chief executive of Intel to be fired. Why, you might ask? We know why he calls for the firing of the chair of the Federal Reserve, for instance, Jerome Powell. I mean, that may be a bad thing for him to do, but the Fed does have an important role impacting public policy. But a private corporation? And that's his business. Why? Well, because the chip industry is seen as highly strategic. Trump alleged that Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan was highly conflicted due to alleged investments in companies supposed to be linked to the Chinese military. Tan has said that this was misinformation, which is rarely a response that carries a huge amount of weight with the president, even though it's usually true of the things that he comes out with. So then, a couple of days ago, the Trump administration said it was working on taking a 10% ownership stake in Intel. And this would be achieved by converting grants that had been given to the company during the Biden administration into equity, which is literally increasing government control of the means of production. Karl Marx would have been so proud. But as with all things MAGA, apparently it's catastrophic if the other side were to even think of doing it, but it's just peachy if Trump decides to do it. The last time the US government took stakes in companies, of course, was during the global financial crisis, where it was used to prop up financial institutions that were on the verge of collapse, whose failure might lead to a cascading set of collapses that would have had major consequences for many, many people. None of the chip companies are remotely in that situation. So arguably, this is an example of the US government picking strategic industries, directing them according to its own plan. In the way that China often does. China, which was now able to see its companies buying NVIDIA H20 chips. And then in stepped Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Lutnick was interviewed by CNBC back on July the 15th, where he was asked about the wisdom of sending the H20 chips to China. Like a supervillain, spontaneously going off on a monologue where he tells the captured hero all of his nefarious plans, he said this: "We don't sell them our best stuff, not our second best stuff, not even our third best. You want to sell the Chinese enough that their developers get addicted to the American technology stack. That's the thinking. Gee, what could possibly go wrong with such a devious plan? Well, apart from someone blurting it out in public, maybe." And it turns out that China's leaders got to hear about Lutnick's comments and found them deeply insulting, first of all. And you can imagine they weren't much attracted by the plan to tie them into America's technology stack, given the way this administration uses any such dependency as leverage, and given the way Lutnick admitted they were doing it with deliberate intent. Lo and behold, according to the Financial Times today, China is now taking action to restrict its tech firms from buying the processors. This is seeing various Chinese companies cancelling or significantly downsizing their H20 orders, which is already hitting NVIDIA. NVIDIA had been going to some lengths to keep warm relations with China. Its chief executive, Jensen Huang, was in Beijing only last month, working to remain competitive there, regardless of the obvious geopolitical conflicts of the moment. And that visit has seen enough H20 orders resulting to start work on opening up production lines dedicated to the chip. And that now must seem like a doomed endeavour. Up until this point, Chinese companies like Alibaba and ByteDance had been telling the government that their AI development would be constrained unless they could buy NVIDIA's chips. Apparently, the FT said, people close to those companies are now accepting they have to focus on switching. And one of them said, Lutnick's speech gives the regulator one more reason to intensify its efforts to push tech firms to use China's own chips. Now, China's internet regulator has issued notice to the companies that, due to security concerns, they have to halt new orders of H20s. They did this, claiming that the chips had location tracking built in, can be shut down remotely, claims that NVIDIA disputes for all the difference that that's likely to make. The thing is that Key Chinese ministries had welcomed Huang when he visited last month. They were enthusiastic about a positive signal for foreign businesses to engage in trade going forward. But it was the Trump government getting directly involved that managed to turn that around. Because they couldn't help themselves but seek leverage to exploit and to be insulting while doing it. So China's foreign ministry said, as a matter of principle, science, technology and economic and trade issues should not be politicized, instrumentalized or weaponized. Now, it could possibly still be rescued. The US and China are obviously still in trade negotiations while Trump's punitive tariffs are paused, so the issue of AI chips could potentially be resolved in those. Although if China really wants to avoid creating a dependency, you'd assume that they wouldn't be up for it. If Trump wants to rescue his government's joint venture profit-seeking, he might entice the Chinese with a more powerful chip. So he's suggested he could potentially allow a downgraded NVIDIA Blackwell chip, the B30A, to be exported to China, which is supposed to have higher performance. And he has the advantage that Beijing has a short-term severe chip shortage until several new advanced production lines are due to be launched next year. But then, if China's nervous of tech designed to fail them when Washington, D.C. wills it, then the direct involvement of the Trump administration in the chip manufacturing businesses is not exactly an asset to them. And you have to assume that Trump involving himself in American leading companies is going to become an emerging theme in the future. If the tech bro oligarchs were so keen to involve themselves in this major political revolution, it makes sense that they become active players, perhaps not always in ways that they'd anticipated or wanted. But they are where the money is, and Trump is all about the money. So you have to imagine these won't be the only Trump government joint ventures with them. How lucky they must feel, knowing they can draw on the same business acumen that brought the world Trump casinos. Indeed, they may not be given the choice.